The study is focusing on using the multi-asset risk approach to understand the risk and the cascading risks and their impacts in Nairobi and their policy implications. So the focus for those who are new to the study, we are focusing on Nairobi City, but also we did select two informal settlements. So one is called Mukuru and another one is called Kipera. So Nairobi has 11 informal settlements. So the aim actually, especially for Mukuru, was is to understand the consequences of development interventions on dynamic vulnerabilities to hazard risk and decision support environment for risk integration into integrated development planning in Nairobi. But also the lessons from Mukuru is to inform also the planning for Kipera, because the Mukuru is the first informal settlement in Nairobi to develop what we call a special area plan, and the others, 4, including Kipera, have been gazetted. So in the approach that we have actually used, we have used city-led DRR policy dialogues. Last year we held 3, and we had also key informant interviews, especially targeting the different stakeholders. And we also brought in the local community. So we did map 150 community-based organizations across the informal settlements in Nairobi, and we brought 30 for a dialogue. And recently, we did also a comprehensive survey to look at the implication of the infrastructure on risk reduction in Mukuru, and we did select Mukuru Kwaruged, which is a small segment of one of the informal settlements, and we had 400 households. So we have also documentation and looking at also flood hazard modeling, which is ongoing. And the question now is, what are some of the key lessons that could inform integrated urban planning? So what are some of the key policy lessons or general lessons? So we have got 4. One is that building relations between governments and stakeholders is actually a key enabler to facilitating not only learning, but also uptake of evidence to inform policy and planning, both at the city level and at the local level. And for the hub in 2019 May, there was a signing of MOU between the county government led by former governor of Nairobi and also the team from the UK and Nairobi. And thereafter we did engage, especially the sectors across the city, and we brought together 12 sectors which actually submitted their standard operating procedures for review. But also we did map the DRR stakeholders across Nairobi, and one of the output is that the humanitarian agencies actually are, if you look at this infographic, you realize that the humanitarian agencies make the larger part of the community on DRR, but the private sector in red is actually quite small. So there is need especially to enhance a stakeholder contribution. But also, what is the vision for Nairobi? So one workshop was convened to bring together the stakeholders from Nairobi to share what could be the vision for Nairobi, and largely they agreed that for a better, high resilient Nairobi, there must be strong contribution from private sector, but also support from the county government as a regulatory agency. The second lesson is multi-asset risk assessment is key in understanding not only risk, but also cascading risks and their impacts among the urban poor. And this we have done flood and fire hazard modeling. And if you look at the incidences, especially in Nairobi, is quite increasing, but of course, some are not drastically increasing. And when you look at this other map on the right, the red is showing where the flood impact actually is expected to be very high, and this is where the informal settlement like Mukuru is lying. In terms of fire, the buildings are actually quite close, so there is high potential. If you look at the red, high potential for fire spread among the infrastructure. So another second lesson is that integrated policy approach is critical for building resilience of the urban poor, especially, and also developing cities. And one, we did what you call policy mapping, where we realized at the global level and the national level, there is quite substantive policy development. But when you look at the below this dark line, this is what is happening in Nairobi City. So there is limited policy work which is ongoing, but of course the city managed to develop the legislation in 2015, but it doesn't have a policy, a plan and a strategy to operationalize. And one of the output of this is that the city's sectors, that is the high level policy makers and then also the middle level, that they couldn't operationalize the legislation. When you look at the sector level also, which we did, look at the standard operating procedures, why means these sectors had the standard operating procedures, ND meaning that hazard or risk was not detected, and you realize that largely all the sectors didn't integrate risk into their standard operating procedures. The second lesson is the risk landscape is quite complex, and if you look at this analysis of stakeholders, you realize that at the subnational level is quite complex. Now you find that each player is trying to do something, but there's no lack of clarity in terms of responsibility, and also especially bringing on board strongly the private sector. The last lesson is that developing a city-led DRR research and impact forum framework is quite critical in supporting leveraging the lessons from the research to DRR platforms. And this is the entry point for the research, especially the Multiasset study that you are undertaking, is actually at the prevention phase, where it will now feed at the subnational level, feed in the government-led and UNDR-led platforms. So this is the overall framework that you have co-developed that could support us to engage now in terms of what you have done here, from stakeholder mapping, risk modeling, policy mapping, community engagement and stakeholder engagement. How can now this transition to the DRR platforms where the policies are being decided? So this is the framework that you have developed that is just a feedback mechanism, but of course we are still improving with the partners. So how do we fill the gaps, especially the low capacity, the lack of risk integration, is that you have the plan with the city to improve on the lessons learned from the risk, vulnerability assessment, modeling, but also organize for targeted city-led DRR workshops, which are starting next month and also ending in April. First is to co-develop a DRR database for Nairobi, provide policy oversight, especially updating the 12 sectors, standard operating procedures and the legislation, and also strengthening the citywide community of practice, but also linking with the DRR platforms, and of course sharing the lessons with the regional and global DRR platforms. So what are the implications, especially of the decisions that are going to be made? One is actually to inform the evidence-based DRR policy framework and risk-proof planning to facilitate resilient Nairobi. And also, secondly, the output of the 8th regional platform for DRR in Kenya, the declaration which was made at the 7th high-level meeting had some of the provisions which can give us the opportunity, because it acknowledges the sustained and regional partnership, but also the area around advocacy and integration of evidence. So this is going to be our target in terms of bringing also the stakeholders, and you have engaged, and I think the team from BNDRR is actually present, and they've been involving us, but not only bringing the wider DRR stakeholders, but also especially the private sector. And I think leveraging also making resilient cities 2030 to be one of the items that you are going to utilize this platform to leverage. And of course, lastly, is to sustain evidence-based learning among the DRR towards achieving this high resilient Nairobi of tomorrow. Thank you so much.